Yo, what's up guys, it's your boy Favs. In this video I'm talking about how you can find the perfect crosshair for you. Unfortunately, there isn't a perfect crosshair that fits everyone, because while most people have different opinions and preferences. You know, some people like big crosshairs and some like small. But picking the right crosshair is still very important, because it can most definitely have a huge impact on your individual skill level. I just quickly wanted to mention that if you found this video helpful at the end, then be sure to hit that red subscribe button, because it really helps me out. But without further ado, let's jump into this video. I'm going to start with talking about the different styles of crosshairs available in CSGO. Right now there are 6 different styles available. Default Dynamic, Default Static, Classic Dynamic, and the other version of Classic Dynamic. And we have Classic Static, and then we have the Classic Hybrid. My personal favorite is the Classic Static, because I personally find the movement of the dynamic crosshairs very distracting, and because of it I focus on the wrong thing. Although I know that some people actually like using the dynamic crosshairs because it shows when your weapon is accurate again. My personal recommendation is that you use one of the classic crosshairs, because it is a lot easier to see where the center of the crosshair is located. So this is the first choice you need to make. Here you can try the different styles to see which one fits you the best, but now we're jumping over to the size of the crosshair. The next thing we're looking into is the size, or the length of the crosshair. I personally have what you would call a small crosshair. I have 1.5 in size. You can choose from 0 to 10 in size, but obviously 0 doesn't make any sense since you won't see your crosshair at all. If you use a big crosshair, I would say between 5 to 10. It's pretty good in close ranges because, well, you can see easier where your crosshair is located. Although big crosshairs can be a real nuisance on long ranges, because the crosshair can cover up the entire player model of your opponent, and then it might be hard to accurately put your crosshair on the opponent's head. And if you instead choose a small crosshair, maybe between 1.5 and 2.5, then it would be a lot easier to aim for your opponent's head, although it might be harder to put your crosshair in the right spot in close ranges, because it isn't as visible. A bigger crosshair might be better for new players, because they haven't really gotten used to where their crosshair is usually located. For those people who have played CSGO for a long time, they already have it in their muscle memory where their crosshair is located, so they don't necessarily need to see the crosshair that clearly. But of course, this is still personal preference, as with everything in this video really. As I said, I prefer to have my crosshair pretty small, so that I can accurately place my crosshair on the opponent's head, especially on long ranges. Although it might be easier to spray on long ranges with a big crosshair, because then you have a much bigger target to actually aim at. So obviously here you have to choose what you feel most comfortable with and what might benefit you the most. The same thing applies here as it did with the size of the crosshair. I personally prefer to keep my crosshair thickness pretty slim, more specifically at 1, because it is a lot easier to spot opponents on long ranges with a slim crosshair, since the crosshair doesn't cover much of the screen. Here's my crosshair at 1 in thickness, and here it is in 6. As you can see, there's a big difference here. Because of the thickness, the gap also gets adjusted, so you have to keep that in mind. But the same principle applies here. You play with the thickness you feel most comfortable with. The gap of the crosshair is also something you need to think of to perfect your crosshair. I personally have my gap at -1. I prefer this gap because it isn't too small, and most importantly, it isn't too big. If your crosshair gap is too big, then it's going to be really hard for you to actually aim in the correct spot, because it's going to be really hard for you to actually know where the center of the crosshair is. But on the other hand, the bigger gap would also give you a better visual of the opponents, whilst the small crosshair, as mentioned before, is going to make it easier for you to see the center of the crosshair. So I would personally recommend having it at least 0 or below, but of course that is just my personal opinion. Something you also need to keep in mind is if the gap is too small, you still can't see the center of your crosshair very clearly. So here you really have to find your own personal sweet spot. I mean, the only real advantage with having an outline is that it might make your crosshair more visible. Although of course too thick of an outline is going to be a disadvantage in my opinion, because it just takes up too much space. So basically some people prefer to have an outline and some don't. I personally don't need the outline, so I usually keep it disabled. Some people actually prefer to have a T-shaped crosshair. If you don't know what that is, it's on the screen right now. There isn't really that much to talk about when it comes to this. This is purely personal preference. I personally prefer a normal shaped crosshair. I'm just more comfortable with that crosshair, but I'm sure the T-shaped crosshair works just fine as well though. There are a couple of different ways to play with a dot crosshair. The first one is just of course to have a dot, and the second option is to both have a normal shaped crosshair and a dot in the middle of that. If you want to set a dot crosshair, it is pretty easy to get. You just turn your crosshair length or size down to 0, and then you enable the dot, and you can adjust the size of the dot with the thickness option. I know some people really like playing with the dot crosshair, but I prefer just to use the normal shaped crosshair. This option basically just adjusts the clarity of the crosshair. The higher the value, the more it's going to stick out. I recommend having this at a pretty big value because you generally want your crosshair to be as visible as possible. I personally have my value at 200, which I think is the standard value. You want the color you're going to be playing with to be easily visible. For example, if you're playing with a yellow crosshair on a map like Mirage or Dust 2, it's going to be really hard to actually see your crosshair, because it's going to blend in. That's why I prefer to use the green color, since there's really no map that has that color theme. Personally, I'm not very picky when it comes to my crosshair. I can really use any crosshair as long as I can see it clearly, but I also know that there are some people that really need to have the right crosshair to be able to perform. If the video helped you, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and of course the like button to help support me. Anyway guys, thanks for watching, see you next time, and peace.